can't sleep. Can you tell me a bedtime story?
All right. What do you want to hear?
When we're young, we often fantasize about what adults around us actually do all day long. My dad traveled the country. To a 7-year-old, it sounded like an adventure, even if in reality he was just a salesperson for a sports company. In A Story About My Uncle, you discover your uncle actually has been going on fantastic adventures. This time, though, he's gone missing, and it's your job to track him down. The story about my uncle comes from Gone North Games in Stockholm, Sweden. But first, a
confession. I'm one of those people who really enjoyed Bionic Commando, the mostly forgotten 3D reboot of the classic Capcom game from 2009 that more or less killed Capcom USA in the process. You won't see me defending the crazy-ass plotting of Bionic Commando, but the feeling of swinging around in a 3D world was enough to propel me to the finish line.
I simply love games that give you that kind of freedom. That sense of weight, motion, risk, and reward is a huge reason why I remain such a fan of Mirror's Edge. Few games have anything quite like it. The story about my uncle joins the sadly small group of video games with swinging at the heart of its gameplay. And while the implementation here isn't perfect, it gives the player a sense of agency that matches the awe of inhabiting a big, gorgeous looking 3D space. Many games surround the player with amazing locales, but A Story About My Uncle actually lets you see what it has to offer. The game opens with players discovering a suit that allows them to leap enormous distances. There's a magical quality to the first dozen jumps. That is, before it becomes clear the game's missing a pretty key ingredient: weight. The player character feels incredibly floaty in A Story About My Uncle, which can make it difficult to predict how to time your jumps. There's a good reason most games don't even bother with first-person platforming. It's incredibly hard to make players feel in control. Soaring through the air will only get you so far before frustration sets in. For the most part, A Story About My Uncle avoids this problem by masking the platforming element. Players are given suggestions on where to leap next through big, bright symbols, but the suit can grapple onto just about everything in the environment. This means most of the game is simply about enjoying the freedom afforded by the suit rather than worrying about where to land. Navigating enormous chasms will at first seem really intimidating, but soon enough it's entirely second nature. A Story About My Uncle, for a while, is a game about enjoying the ride. Almost. A Story About My Uncle ditches this idea near the end of the game. It's not uncommon for a video game to turn up the difficulty as the conclusion nears, a way of challenging players to capitalize on their refined skills. But A Story About My Uncle doesn't earn flipping this switch. The game mechanics aren't good enough. The game nearly undoes all the goodwill it's built in the hours before through a series of platforming gauntlets that are better at testing patience, not skill. Some sections feel more about luck than anything else, forcing players to leap into the oblivion and hope against hope it's possible to latch onto another object. During these moments, which also take place within the game's most boring environment, one can't help but keep dreaming about the past.
I can't stop dreaming. I see my name in lights, and everybody wants a piece of me. So I'ma keep going until I reach the top. I'm gonna live that champagne lifestyle till I drop. I'ma shine like I'm on TV.
It's frustrating because what comes before is so wonderful. There are a handful of moments where I was spending more time looking around the world than swinging in it, taking in everything around me. And it's not like the developers aren't capable of making the player sweat a little bit. A section involving a one-eyed monster that attacks when the player swings is a notable highlight. I've managed to make it this far without mentioning the game's story because, well, there's not much to it. The Story About My Uncle introduces you to a few characters, but only one of them is given enough time to become more than a plot device to move the story from point A to point B.
Your help will not be necessary. The crystal is not for you to have.
What? I want to help finding Fred. Why couldn't I?
The whole game seems centered around the main character's bond to his uncle, But when the moment finally arrives, when the player finally gets there, the game moves to the end credits as fast as possible, and you're left pretty empty. A Story About My Uncle may have left me looking for more in the end, but it's the definition of a game defined by the journey, not the conclusion. So many games obsess with providing players with power fantasies as defined by Michael Bay. There are other kinds of power fantasies too, and games like A Story About My Uncle allow me to indulge them. Sometimes you just want to fly.